lobs in some code and then disappears, and then it becomes someone else's, i.e. our responsibility to maintain it. So just, I don't think the criteria have to be super stringent, but there should be some objective criteria to evaluate against. And this is a good forcing function for that.
Okay, I agree. Andrew just joined. Andrew, we were just talking about what it would take to bring DigitalOcean into the list of cloud provider repositories. And Jago was mentioning about we have to come up with a set of criteria to qualify what makes a cloud provider, and then people who satisfy that criteria can get added to that list.
Yeah.
Okay.
So as a first pass on that, we have the proposal of what the repositories need to look like. Now, it's unreasonable to enforce that now because it's brand new. But I think demonstrating a history of work on a project, but also demonstrating, like, at a minimum, but I would say starting in the 1.11, in the 1.12 release cycle, the minimum requirement should be you conform to the requirements. Like if you don't conform to the requirements of a provider, then that should be the first gate, the first bar to get past. We're working on those right now, so it's a hard requirement to enforce, but looking forward, I think that's a requirement. But just demonstrating ownership and a commitment to ownership is also important.
Yeah, so I saw the cloud provider repos go up, and yeah, like I've been waiting for a community-owned repo for DigitalOcean for a while, so it would be kind of annoying if I had to wait to prove kind of history.
Yeah. I don't think we need, maybe the demonstrated part is the subjective part, but maybe some form where we say how number of users is more than 10. I mean, I'm not looking for super strict requirements that this is a massive multi-international corporation. I'm just looking for some objective set of criteria where we can say, yes, this works, and no, this is a middle school kid who's interested in providing his home cluster of Raspberry Pis. There has to be some way to distinguish between those two, and it shouldn't be based on personalities.
Right. So I guess we're talking right now what that looks like.
Sure. Yeah, I'm just writing down in the notes. I've conformed to the requirements of a cloud provider, demonstrated commitment to support. I'll put a question mark there.
And along these lines too, where there should be, I think that if we're going to have, I think it's entirely reasonable to say that there are criteria for removal too. Like if you don't have active contributors, if you can't contact the person who, the owner of the file, they don't show up to cloud provider working group meetings, setting some sort of criteria that says that, an active level of engagement is required, maintenance on these is required. If you're failing all your tests, if you have automated tests and you're failing tests, like setting requirements to say that, if you reach a point where you're not clearly not being supported anymore, that, that's grounds for, in some sense, removal. Yeah. Because you don't, that's, especially being within the Kubernetes organization, that that requires, I think for the community that requires some level of respect to that, I guess. I don't know if that's the right word, but
right. You don't want cloud providers who've been added and they just don't participate at all.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure. So building on a theme from earlier in this meeting and making more support or more work for Caleb since he's not here, this feels like it follows on to the creation of those repositories. So I'd like to see if he's interested in taking a swing at a doc that we can review next week. Does that sound okay?
Definitely.
Yeah. Sure.
Is this going to block is that going to block new repos though until we have that hashed out? Because I was hoping for a cloud provider DigitalOcean repo as soon as possible.
I think that makes total sense. And to me, I mean, my observation in this working group is that DigitalOcean has been involved since the very beginning and has been chopping a lot of wood and carrying a lot of water, so to speak.
Yeah. Do you have existing code somewhere, Andrew? Do you have a repository existing that has the Cloud Controller Manager interface implemented?
Yep.
And that's a huge first step.
Okay.
And just to manage expectations, there have been wonky, unexpected obstacles in creating new repos in the Kubernetes org, just as that process changes. So though I'm supportive, there might be a couple of administrative obstacles to overcome. So I don't think this set of criteria for future cloud providers needs to be a blocker, but there may be other blockers. I think the reason we were able to do what we were for the existing cloud providers is because they're essentially grandfathered in under the old, already part of CNCF owned code and so on and so forth. So,
right. Yeah, and I'm wondering too, a lot of us are attached to SIGs also, like there's SIG Azure, SIG AWS, SIG OpenStack, and I'm not sure if, like we would need to do like SIG DigitalOcean. Like maybe there's, it's hard to know if that, maybe there would be enough, but maybe, the working group cloud provider kind of captures that, as an organization where, the cloud providers meet and, promotion from a working group to a SIG may make sense at some point if there are a number of smaller cloud providers, who have shared interests and have shared code, and they want to have, more formalized, venue for contributing in that way.
I'm just trying to capture that in the notes after I have this AI for Caleb. But yeah, I agree with that. I think there's been a bit of an explosion in SIGs, and I'm not sure. I kind of even pushed back on the SIG GCP, thinking it was a bit of an odd concept, but it is a useful mechanism to have a meeting that is broadcast widely. So I think I have mixed feelings about that at this point, but this working group becoming a SIG seems like it has enough participation and real discussion that maybe that makes sense now. Others have thoughts on that?
I think nothing other than sure. Yeah.
I guess it's a little too early to tell if we should be continuing as a working group or be a SIG. But to be honest, I think it's just a naming convention. Like I'm not sure if it makes too much of a difference.
Yeah.
Right.
That's true.
Yeah, operationally it's the same.
Working groups are the new SIG.
So the next action item, or the next thing that's been on our plate, is end-to-end tests. And last week, I think Andrew and Chris, were you also going to participate in the end-to-end testing? Because you said DIMS had something for OpenStack, and we were going to build off of that.
Yeah, I mean, actually what had happened is DIMS has he created a gate job. Right now it's not passing, and there's a document that I have. Let me drop the link into the chat here because I set up a working document to capture notes on this.
Right, I've seen it. And Daniel's pull request was mentioned in that document. Daniel's here today.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right, so everyone should be able to write to that document. But he created a gate job that works against locolup.sh, and the idea is it's a small, you start with a node, you run loculup, and it brings up a single node Kubernetes cluster, and runs the end-to-end tests against that. And he's using that as a starting point for creating a very small test platform. And his thoughts were that you could, starting with that job, you could then enable the cloud providers off of that. And so if you're running the job on a particular cloud, you can enable the provider for that, and then those features will become available, and it's a simple way to test the provider against that. I also think it's worth noting that the CNCF CI/CD group they're running end-to-end tests in some flavor on their dashboard. And I'll drop a link into there too. And it might be possible to build off of some of that work. It's a little bit heavier weight. They're expecting they use Terraform and build out a multi-node installation. Generally three control plane nodes and 3 worker nodes, and then they're installing other software on top of that. But it's also a place to that you can use as kind of an example of what's being done.
Yeah, so I had a question. So I started some work on the end-to-end tests on my end, but it's mostly just going to be like bash scripts and whatnot for the provisioning part. So with the end-to-end test, do we want to have focus on how a cluster is provisioned, or do we just want to mainly focus on like how the tests are being reported by every cloud?
We want to change how it's provisioned as well, because they're going to be using the CCM.
Right, but like I'm talking about like how the nodes are provisioned and what APIs are used to create the actual nodes. Like, do we care? Like, as long as the CCM is running, do we care about anything else?
Not.
I think in general we do not care, but I think the thing is that we somehow have to create that stuff. So at the moment, the nodes, etc., that are created in the end-to-end tests, they're all very GCP specific, and that does not match our testing needs.
Yeah, so I think.
And I mean, if we are not going to do this, who else is gonna? So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, consistency is nice. If there's consistency, that's nice. I'm not sure it should be a strict requirement.
Well, actually, I think what Daniel was trying to say earlier was that we made changes to the node controller and how nodes get initialized in Kubernetes. Mm-hmm. So node provisioning is something that we do care about.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the thing that makes the most sense to me is to run the conformance test suite as a sort of smoke test, not the full end-to-end tests every single time. That can actually, I think, get pretty expensive for some of the smaller cloud providers. But running, every 6 hours or something, the conformance test suite, and that will likely be insufficient in the near term just because of the coverage numbers in the conformance tests.
Yeah.
And submit those results back to test grid was the original thought here. I did look at what the CNCF group is doing. They seem to have different goals and some challenges in building all that is included in some of these products. So I think it's a useful, necessary, but not sufficient for the needs of this, of the folks that are probably involved in this working group.
And what I think is, as far as I know, the conformance tests do not test anything that's cloud provider specific. And I believe that for the CCM, we will need many tests that are very specific here. So for example, we need to test that the node initialization works correctly. And of course, that's something that's not covered in the conformance test. That's something that we need to do. And that's also an example where we need to interact with the cloud that's underlying the cluster. So in this example, to create a cluster and delete it afterwards.
Like the conformance tests do, to use a label on the or an annotation in the test code itself to add something like cloud provider. And you can run the conformance tests and the cloud provider, or just the cloud provider tests. I would expect when working on cloud provider specific code, engineers are likely to run those tests more frequently.
Yeah.
And then the follow-up is to run the conformance test to make sure nothing unexpected happened.
Yeah, I agree with that. And what I think what we need to discuss about is how we implement these interactions with the underlying cloud. So in my pull request, my idea was to create a small high-level library that covers such methods like create node, and I'm not sure what's all that we need here. And then we would need to plug in concrete implementations into that library for the different cloud providers. And I guess that should be pretty easy. But what gets hard is how to pass the configuration here into the end-to-end tests. So for my simple test, I just did a small implementation for OpenStack, and I passed in all the configuration to environment variables here. But I don't think that's an option for the real-world implementation. There we need to look how the other end-to-end stuff does this.
Yeah. Secret management is important.
Yeah, so sorry, I just wanted to follow up and go into a little bit more detail. So the expectation is that we're running the same set of tests in Kubernetes/Kubernetes, and every cloud provider is supposed to add their own implementation of provisioning and cluster, and then we're going to run the same set of tests there. Is that the idea? Because my impression was that, like, if you're running on an external repo, you provision it however you want, you run whatever tests you want, and you're reporting that to a centralized like test grid. And that removes the need for us to have pull requests going into the main repo to fix tests and then whatnot.
Yeah, I think that the SIG testing has guidelines on how you can build out third-party testing, to report back to the test grid, and there are requirements there as to the format that you use, the availability of logs to be able to, so that if, jobs pass and fail, you can go and you can check the logs. And it's going to be largely the responsibility of the owners of those repositories to figure out how that happens. But at the end of the day, if you want to be reporting back into the test grid, there are standards that you need to follow. So for example, on the OpenStack side, we're looking at either having OpenStack Infra, or there's this new initiative called the Open Lab. But we're using Zool across both of those infrastructures, and Zool can watch GitHub and say, okay, a new pull request is coming to Kubernetes, and they can trigger third-party jobs, and then report back to the test grid on those jobs. And so, but how every provider does that in a lot of ways is left up to them.
Yeah, and that, just going back to the conversation about the CNCF link that was dropped in the chat. The thing that I think is insufficient in that is that they are sort of an external central system that has credentials to log into other cloud providers, but they're testing only what is publicly available, not what you're working on now today. And the other aspect is many of these products, GKE included, is not just open source Kubernetes, but there's also this provisioning and cluster lifecycle stuff that happens that's not in the open source repo that is triggered through the GKE UI or GCP cloud CLI and stuff like that, that they simply can't have access to in the same way. And I expect that others, Azure and AWS and DigitalOcean, and everyone has their own sort of cluster initiation scripts that happen. So that's why when I went through it with them, I thought that just posting back to test grid was probably the right direction for this initiative. If other people have more information or want to revisit that, I'm happy to sync up offline or continue it here if that's helpful.
Cool.
But that team seemed to agree with that direction as well. That was at KubeCon. I met with those folks.
Okay. Yeah, I guess we'll follow up on that.
Okay. Just wanted to share that it's not a not invented here problem. It's more just it doesn't seem to align with it doesn't have the same goals. So were there any open questions about how it seems like there's almost alignment on what the strategy and direction for the posting back to test grid are, but were there open questions on how to do that? Maybe from Daniel, did you?
Yeah. So for me, the question would be how to proceed actually on the actual implementation of these tests. I mean, I have a very, very simple prototype at the moment for a first test. But the question is how should I continue here with the implementation?
So have you posted those back to test grid? The test results?
Yeah, not really. So I mean, I added a test to the end-to-end test suite. And I mean, of course, if I now would open a PR request for this and it would get merged, etc., then the results would be included in the normal end-to-end test runs. So there's nothing directly to report here. But this whole stuff on how to interact with the underlying cloud to create nodes for tests, etc., I guess that's a bigger change to the infrastructure of the tests here.
Are you saying that there's a deviation in the underlying code and the tests, and there's no uniform interface for interacting with the underlying cloud? Is that what you're getting?
Exactly. Yeah, there is no such interface, and I think that we need it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that the individual provider should be responsible for. I think it would be a mistake to have, for the working group or for the Kubernetes organization to be maintaining credentials to every cloud. Especially since all of these providers have ways of managing their resources. Like I know that, we have test infrastructure in place, and if you wanted to set up, for SIG OpenStack is planning on, building out Zool infrastructure that will report back to test grid, and that's just how we're going to.
So Chris, I think we're talking about two different things.
Exactly.
There's general agreement with you that it should be on the responsibility of each cloud provider to configure and run their own tests and submit those test results back to test grid. I don't think there's disagreement on that.
Okay.
I think what Daniel's bringing up is slightly different, which is that he's working on tests to test the cloud provider that he's working on. And what he's finding is there's no way to reuse those end-to-end tests for other cloud providers because there's no uniform abstraction or interface across cloud.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And that is worth drilling into. So Daniel, if you can just take a thought experiment, like quick couple paragraphs and some bullet points on what you're thinking on that, I think that would be really useful to share with this group.
Yeah, I agree with that. So I also agree with Chris that the actual tests.
We lost your audio, Daniel.
Yeah,
we can't hear you anymore. I thought it was just me.
Sorry. Sorry. Back again. Okay.
Yeah.
So where did I stop to be recorded?
Pretty much shortly after you started, you just
okay.
You agreed with Chris, and that's all you did so far.
Okay. Two that all the tests should. Okay, I think that my network is lagging a bit. So okay, I guess I'll write down what my thoughts are, and then
Yeah. So I understand what you're saying. So a uniform way for providers to implement to start running the tests, and I think that there's, that's an open question, and I think you started down that path, and DIMS has started down that path. I think that there's a way for us to,
exactly.
to find that
to get together
and encourage common behavior, and even maybe have a library somewhere that enforces that behavior.
I mean, especially because I think that there will be a set of tests that should be common across all the different cloud providers.
The tests that actually validate against like node spec can definitely be shared, because we're changing the same fields, just different values.
Exactly. And I think this common library is pretty important.
Daniel, is there any overlap with the cluster API that the SIG cluster lifecycle group is working on?
I'm not sure. I guess if the cluster API is available, that I'm not sure. I guess it could help us.
I'm not super
But
familiar.
would that?
I think there
Yeah,
is some node.
yeah, I'm myself not too familiar with it, so I'm not sure if the cluster API allows you to create nodes and such stuff.
I think it does. Last I saw it, there was something about a concept of machines and machine sets. But we might take a look at it before creating our own.
Yeah, that might be a good idea.
I got to drop off. Not anything anyone said, just have to run.
Okay.
Thanks, guys. Have a good day.
Thank you, Jago.
Yeah, bye.
We still want to talk to Anoop, who has a pull request. Hey, Anoop, do you want to go over your pull request? Thank you, Jago. Bye.
So yeah, actually, I submitted a new commit on the PR, and it's passing the job. So I would appreciate.
So this is to deprecate external ID, right?
Yes, that's correct. Let me post the link,
please.
Yeah, so basically the external ID resource field is deprecated, and I'm just trying to remove that and replace it with the instance ID field, which is basically doing the same thing of returning the provider ID.
Okay. So does this mean every cloud provider has to start using instance ID going forward, or is external ID still supported?
No, like I've made changes in the cloud provider's instances file, and yeah, wherever external ID was used, I have been using instance ID.
Is there any way we can change the interface to keep the external ID call, but have the actual implementation of the cloud controller to just make a really loud error that it's a deprecated field? Just because like as soon as you delete that method, pretty much in the next Kubernetes version, you're forcing every cloud provider to, like they're forced to make that change upstream.
So right now, actually, in the method of external ID, usually instance ID method is only called. So if you want, we can add the error message or something. But right now, most of the cloud providers are internally calling instance ID itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
now that I think about it, maybe it is better just to remove the field, because if we kept it and we didn't do anything about it, it might confuse some people as to what the behavior is.
So if you
so can you quickly tell us like what changes would be required from the cloud providers because of this request?
Yeah. So the external ID method is used in for checking basically whether the node exists or not, and it is being called through instance exists by provider ID method. So these methods are called while registering the node. Yeah.
So let's say Nick Turner from Amazon's here. Would he have to go make a change in the Amazon cloud provider today to support this change? Like, do you know if Amazon's using external ID method directly?
So Amazon is actually, wait, I have changed Amazon's file.
So my feeling on a change like something like this is if this is changing an interface, that the change should start with a deprecation warning, which would last, say, through the 1.11 cycle, and then it would be removed at the beginning of the 1.12 cycle so that you wouldn't break existing work. We would be sending a clear message that this would be going away, and then you take it away.
Yeah,
Because-
the confusing
because-
thing is that we did deprecate it a while ago, but we just left a comment and we didn't do anything about it.
Also, we deprecated in a weird way where we just deprecated in I think the interface only, and not in all the different places it was using it. So not everyone was on board, so we didn't really do the due diligence of informing everyone about deprecation. I guess we'd have to do it now.
Guys, actually, I have to hop onto another meeting. If
Okay.
you don't mind, I will be on the channel again past 11:30.
Okay, all right, thank you. I'll look at the pull requests.
Yeah, right now, I've made changes to multiple cloud providers instances file, and I've removed external ID from instances interface.
Okay.
And gate is passing, all the jobs are passing.
Okay.
But I will chat with you on the channel, and if you want, I can first add the deprecation warning to the file.
Yeah. OpenStack provider uses the interface. Doesn't look like it. It actually invokes it anywhere. So I dropped it into Sig OpenStack to see if anybody would object to it, but
Okay.
I don't think it's going to break anything for us.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Anup. And the pull request is in the chat. I would encourage people from the various cloud providers to look at it and comment on whether this works for you.
Feedback on that, so that I will move forward. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Is there anything else anyone wants to bring up today?
Is anyone going to be at KubeCon? You?
I'm not going to be at KubeCon.
Okay, just asking if anyone's going to be there.
Yeah,
I'll be there.
Oh, that's nice. It's in Europe, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Copenhagen. Yeah.
Have
Cool.
fun there. All right.
If you don't
Yeah,
have a
thank
hotel, book now.
All right, that's it.
All right. Bye.
Bye.